looking forward to what that's going to look like. But today we're wrapping up this series on relationships, not just couple relationships, but all the relationships that have kind of been strained over the last couple of months as we've been challenged to kind of spend more time together, or be locked up together, or have to deal with each other in different ways. But as we get into this, First Corinthians, I'm going to give you a little Bible quiz, and you don't even have to be a church person, I bet, to be able to pass this question. 1 Corinthians 13, which some Bible scholars know as the what chapter? Anybody know? There you go. It's the love chapter. Even if you're not a Christian, there's a really good chance that part of this chapter was probably quoted at your wedding. A lot of the vows that are done at weddings and modern ceremonies come directly from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So this is really, really familiar. I just want to read a portion of it this morning because you're going to fight to check out early on me because it's so familiar. You read through this and it's just easy to kind of think like, yep, got that. That sounds really good. That's mushy. That's sweet. That's cute. Got it. Yeah, it's good advice. I need to work on that. But there's one verse, it's just so easy to skip over because it's right there in the middle. But when you really stop to think about it, I bet your reaction might be, I'm not so sure about that. In fact, just on its own, you might even think it's not very good advice if you just pulled it out. You might even think the opposite of this verse is true. But in this one verse, okay, Paul is making a point about people that are in healthy relationships together, loving relationships. This is something they do, he says, all the time. It's actually 4 little statements and one big statement, and it's a powerful idea. It can transform your relationships, right? And on that really big sell, I know, the surface, this can appear like bad advice. So now I've built all that up. Let's just take a look at these verses leading up to this so you'll know what I'm talking about. Starting at verse 4, he says this. He says, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. And so far we're like, yep, that's great. I need that. That's good stuff, Paul, right? Makes sense. Need to keep it in mind with you. Verse 5 gets a little bit harder. He says it does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. And then this is a good point. He says it keeps no records of wrongs. Now, don't raise your hands or start throwing elbows to anybody beside you right now. But this is a hard one for some of that last little bit, right? Some of you are really good at that, like keeping records. Or maybe like one of your parents or both of your parents are really good at that. They're talking, they're arguing, and it came to an impasse, or your mom pulls out that mental file cabinet. Well, don't you remember back on April 22nd, 2005? And then he's like, yeah, well, I remember waking up at 5:30 that morning, and Paul says love doesn't keep those kind of mental records, right? Verse 6, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. Right, so you celebrate the wins together. Don't get caught up in all the low points. We're good with all this, Paul. I mean, this is great, right? This is good stuff. I'm inspired. I'm feeling the love, Paul, right? Great list. Then he gets to verse 7, okay, this is where Paul uses this one little word 4 times in the connection with 4 other different words. And in this really quick-fire way, he makes these 4 little statements that give us this one big thought where, like, if you tried to pull out just one of these 4 thoughts by themselves, they don't make a lot of sense. But Paul is actually getting, I think, one of the most important habits when it comes to healthy relationships. And here's how he says it. He says, love, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Now, in another version maybe you're more familiar with, he says it bears all things. It believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And now, okay, I know this is in the Bible, but let's be honest in our understanding of this when we read this, okay? Because it's hard not to read something like that and be like, okay, love believes all things, it always trusts. And now I want to kind of kick back against this a little bit, if we're being honest. It almost even sounds a little naive if you didn't know this was in the Bible. That might sound like the recipe for getting hurt. In fact, when I counsel couples, I always try to keep them out of the extremes, like I always and you never, and it has to be black and white and all that kind of stuff. So endures all things. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Like I'm just supposed to be in a bad relationship, Dennis, and just endure it. I just got to endure. I mean, Dennis, isn't that what codependent people do? Isn't that bad? I mean, you'd probably tell somebody if you saw them stuck in a pattern like this that they need to face some realities, right? And I get it. And I think Paul got it too, but he's really teaching an invaluable principle here. So I want you to just kind of stay with me here and lean in with me on this to the end. And I got some visuals to help me out because I'm kind of a visual guy. I need some help sometime. But, in our relationships, in every relationship at some point, there's going to be a gap between our expectations and our actions, our behaviors, in every relationship, right? I expected you to do this, but you actually did this, right? Hope, reality. Now remember, okay, now this is about you. This is not about them, so stay right here with me. It's like you said you'd be here at 4. It's 4:30, again, right? You're not here. You said you'd start taking care of all these chores, and that big pile is still out there. It's still undone. You said you'd call him. Still haven't called him. Right? You said you'd never do that again, but here we are. You're doing it again. Right? This is going to happen at some point in every relationship. I mean, it could be deep stuff, it could be shallow stuff, but it happens to all of us. Now, some of these expectations, they come from promises and commitments that maybe we made. Others might come from just norms that we learned from our past. And we talked a little bit about that last week, like what your mama did, what your daddy did, and who's supposed to cut the grass, and who does the laundry, and who does these chores and that chores and everything. We have expectations we bring in. And in every one of these gaps, we put something. Okay? We can either choose to believe the best or assume the worst. Usually we go to one of these extremes, okay? I expected you to do this, but you actually did this. And you said all this kind of stuff. We do this every single time, and I don't have to go much further for you to already know what your spouse or your son and daughter or someone that you care about, you know what they do, right? But it's harder for you to kind of see what you typically do. You can probably ask them after service because they already know what you do too, if you really need to know. But we either believe the best or we assume the worst. And it starts right here. It starts in our minds, our expectations. We make a judgment to believe the best, well, he's so busy. He already does so much. I'm sure there's a good reason why they're late. Or we just naturally assume the worst. That's so like him. He never looks at his watch, right? He's probably talking with his lame brother again and not thinking about me. She always does for everybody else, but she's never doing anything good for me. On and on and on. And it starts here, it starts in the mind, and we begin to develop this attitude where there's this big gap between our expectations and behaviors and actions. Like she's never good with money. He's always spending what we don't have. And when they get home, right? And you can start working that neck when you start thinking about it sometimes too. But before it comes out in our actions, it starts in our minds, and it kind of goes through this filter. What am I going to do with it? And what you choose to put in this gap, or I want you to understand this too, is it's driven by these two things. Current reality, that's what I can see right in front of me, and my past experiences. It's what I base this on. And like what you see right in front of you is pretty plain, pretty easy. I see that he hasn't shown up yet, right? What you've experienced in the past isn't so easy to identify in the moment, and we don't nearly give it as much thought, but it might be even more important because these are those experiences that we bring into every relationship with us that create these expectations. Like you had a mama, you had a daddy, or and maybe they were great or not so great, or your role models, and you might have had other relationships prior to the relationship you're in, and that had expectations, and those experiences have affected you and maybe infected your heart and the way you interpret things you see now. And if you've been in any kind of relationship for long, you know that it doesn't take much for those other person's responses to kind of trigger a response in you. You just kind of naturally go there. And it's based on the previous experiences that you've had in your life. It just happens, right? Your hurts, your pains, your joys, what you saw growing up, what you see in society, what you've experienced in previous relationships. That can bring that fear of abandonment again, or that anxiety of being alone, your need for control, whatever it might be. We bring all of that along with us into this relationship and what's happening now. And today, that current reality and those past experiences will determine whether we assume the worst, believe the best. That's how we choose. All right, so you with me so far? No, it's getting deep. So let me just ask you then, okay, which way do you tend to go? Like in your mind, as soon as you get that message, running late again, can you pick the kids up? Forgot to lay the pork chops out. Can you pick up something tonight? Dad, I forgot to bring my gym clothes, my lunch again, right? Where do you go? Where do you naturally tend to go? Believe the best, assume the worst. Where you tend to go mentally when there's this gap between expectation and action, okay, here's what I want you to know. People that have learned to build loving relationships for the long haul, they have learned to do this. Believe the best. It doesn't just happen. And I want you to understand too, now, you won't find any loving, healthy relationships that are in it for the long haul where there is no gap, okay? There's always going to be a gap in every relationship because we talked about this before. Every relationship's made up of at least two imperfect people. But what you're going to find are people, but imperfect people who have learned and made a choice and decided and made it a habit to believe the best in each other. They just choose to do it that way. They understand that their partners are not intentionally out to get them. So they choose to give them the benefit of the doubt. They choose to believe the best instead of assuming the worst. In fact, this is interesting, okay? There was a guy named Marcus Buckingham. He did a study where they wanted to study some of these successful, healthy relationships. So they got a group of couples together who, these couples would have considered themselves to be really strong together. They considered themselves happy together. And these are couples that have been together for 10 years or more. So they've been in it. So they were like, okay, well, what's the common denominator? What can we find in common here? Is there, in these successful relationships, like what's the thing? And they had some theories based on all this other research. They thought they kind of knew what the answer was already because you can study a lot of unhappy couples and broken relationships, and they already knew there seemed to be this really huge misunderstanding in these relationships of what the other person was like. Like, I just really don't know this person, and that's what creates these problems. They don't know each other, so there's this big disconnect. They didn't understand each other. So based on that, okay, what's the natural assumption? Well, if people know each other better, these healthy relationships, what we're going to find in these healthy couples is better connections, right? A high level of understanding each other. But, okay, what they actually found was pretty amazing. When they studied these couples who've been 10 years or more together, considered happy, healthy, loving couples, they found that they actually had a pretty unrealistic view of each other. And you're like, okay, well, how in the world does that contribute to a happy relationship? Sounds like it's based on like falsehoods and lies and blinders. Not really, because, okay, what they do, they gave these couples this test where they rated themselves in all these certain categories, and they found that these healthy couples would almost always seem to rate the other person higher in every category than they would rate themselves. Like, they consistently rated each other better, higher than themselves in every category. So they came to the conclusion in this study that like the way they said it, true love is actually blind, somewhat blind. True love is blind. Now, here's just a couple of statements from this study I thought were interesting. They said a spouse's positive illusion. They used the word illusion. Their positive illusion created an upward spiral of love. And now I know that before you think that's just goofy or bogus even, this is exactly what you did when you first fell in love. Okay, you think back to this, I promise you. You thought he was the greatest thing ever, right? You could find no fault in him, even when someone would tell you, you know he's kind of a doofus. No, you just glossed over that and said, yeah, but, right? Somebody came to you and said, I'm not so sure she's all there, man. Have you really got to know her yet? You just went, yeah, but, you see that little dimple? And you had this positive illusion, right? And it led to this upward spiral of love. And later on you found out things. But here's something else they said. They said a husband and wife who believes their spouse possesses the strengths that their spouse doesn't necessarily possess will have a strong marriage. All right, in other words, if I believe Kimberly, my wife, if I believe she possesses strengths that she doesn't even necessarily believe she possesses, that's evidence, they said, of a strong relationship. It's called believing the best in each other. All right, so here was their advice, their action point for this whole big study. They said, find the most generous explanation for each other's behavior and then believe it. Now, here's a couple of examples. You could say, okay, well, she's not really impatient. She's just passionate. That may sound like a stretch, but that's kind of what you're doing, right? He's not insensitive. He's just really focused. Maybe some truth in that, maybe not, right? But I'm believing the best. Basically what they're saying, okay, is that in every relationship, and this is true of any caring relationship, not just couples, at some point there's going to be this gap. Here's what I wanted, here's what I'm getting. And regardless of what your experiences have been, every single time you choose what you put in this gap, you do. This is your decision. And it begins in your mind, and the happiest, healthiest relationships I've learned, they've disciplined themselves. They've chosen to be generous with their explanations. They've chosen to believe the best. All right, so let me just ask you again, where do you naturally go with this? Do you naturally go negative, or do you give the benefit of the doubt? Do you assume the best? That's your decision. And I know you've got stories, and I know you've got experiences, and I'm not discounting any of that. I just want you to think. I'm just asking you, where do you naturally go with this? All right, so now with all of that in mind, because I know after all of that, somebody's thinking, Dennis, I don't come to church to hear a bunch of psychobabble and relational studies. But let's go back, okay, and read 1 Corinthians 13:7 again with just some of this science in mind, okay? This is over 2,000 years old, what we're reading. Yet it is so powerful. It is so relevant. This is why I follow Jesus, because this is real world stuff. And it might just be the key for some of you who have grown apart in your relationships with each other, with your kids, with other people, and you kind of feel like it's hopeless and you'll never feel the love again. I mean, you're against divorce, but you're going to gut it out. At least that's what I'm thinking now, but it's not fun, right? And you've grown. When the phone rings and it's her, or you don't get excited to hear the garage door go up and down anymore. And you've lost the excitement because the kids are there or whatever, but it's just kind of become this cycle of negativity and you feel stuck. Because when you were both here, right, assuming the worst, this is a cycle that just feeds on itself. You did, yeah, well, you did, right? But you always, yeah, well, you never. And the thing is, you could prove that you are right every single time, right? See there, I told you so. There's the proof. You could do that. In fact, let me dig a little. Some of you actually like it when someone else, when you can call someone on something else because it gives you another chance to be right. See, I told you so. Right? So you get in this cycle and you even start looking for it. You start celebrating it. And yeah, you are right. Maybe you win. You win. But what did you actually win? What have you won? You might win arguments. You might win points. You'll feed your ego, which is actually feeding your insecurity, but you are losing the most important relationships in your life. Because it's your choice every single time is what you're going to put into this gap, right? Listen to 1 Corinthians 13:7 again. Listen to the wisdom of this, okay? Love, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. What does it always protect? Well, it protects the integrity of the relationship. I'm not looking for ways to prove you wrong and prove I'm right all the time. I'm looking for ways to put something in the positive column. That's what I'm always looking for, right? It always trusts. In other words, it's always looking for that generous explanation. It's always looking to give the benefit of the doubt first. Always hopes. Like, hopefully there's a good reason. On the surface, it doesn't look real good, and I got some questions and doubts, and that's justified, but okay, hopefully there's something I just don't know yet. I'm not going to give up hope until I'm proven otherwise, right? And always perseveres. It just keeps on going. It always looks to believe the best instead of assuming the worst. So how do you do on this? Where do you naturally go? Okay, here's what I want you to understand. Every time you choose to assume the worst, you have contributed at least a little to the demise of your relationship. And that's heavy, I know. You're like, yeah, but Dennis, you don't understand. I know you've got a good story. Just hear me out before we go into the story. Every time, even when you're right, okay, even when you're justified, even when you choose, every time you choose to go negative, And it's expressed in your attitude, right? Or in your text message, or in that eye roll and that huff, and and you're right. And it goes both ways in every relationship, but every time you choose to go negative, you contribute to the demise of a healthy relationship. Even when it's justified, you become a participant. You add to it, and you can only choose for you. When you go negative, it communicates to that other person at least a little bit that no matter what you do, no matter how you try, you will never measure up. You will never live up to my expectations. And every time you communicate that somehow in your relationship, you push them that much farther away with this wall, and they might react negatively in return. And all you're thinking is, man, if they would just not leave me feeling so disappointed, then we just need to get my expectations in line with your actions, and we'd be fine, right? So come on, just jump a little higher, perform a little bit better, right? Meet my expectations here, boy, right? But that's not how you build love in a relationship. That's not how you build trust, intimacy. One of the most powerful things you can do when there's a gap between these expectations and actions is to show that you haven't disappointed me, is to believe the best. Choose to believe the best, even in those worst moments. Now, is that vulnerable? Yeah. Could you get burned? Yeah. Is it risky? Yes. But okay, here's why I think this is worth the risk. Because when you choose to believe the best, even when there's a pattern of them not meeting your expectations, when you choose to believe the best and when you choose to communicate to them, that creates relational margin. You can't build trust. Trust never happens without the risk that they might burn you. That's how trust is. Otherwise, you're asking for a guarantee. But when I choose to believe the best, I create a margin that allows them, the wall comes down, it gives them room to breathe, it gives them room to grow in my direction. If you have consistently assumed the worst, you have, over time, edged them farther and farther and farther away with no room to move back towards you. And they might even be afraid of you. When you've done this, they dread the phone call. They dread the text message. They naturally assume the worst before they even know what you're going to say. They expect it. Why? Because they don't want to disappoint you, or they're afraid. They don't want to be made to feel like they can't measure up again. Nobody wants to feel like that. But listen, okay, when you choose to believe the best, you communicate, I trust you. I'm giving you room. I know this might not go the way I expect, but I have to give you room or I'll never trust you. Even before I hear the explanation, I'm going to choose to trust you. I choose to because, listen, okay, get this. Trust isn't proof. Trust is a choice. Trust in a relationship means I accept you. I know you're good-willed at heart. I know you never intend to hurt or disappoint me, and you haven't disappointed me. There may be some real things we need to work on. This does not mean I'm glossing over like real issues that we need to work on, but on the front end, I'm choosing to trust you. Now, here's how it might sound tomorrow for you, right? Honey, I'm sorry I got tied up again, and I'm going to be running late again. Okay, well, that's okay. No need to rush. I understand. I'll be here when you get home. Like, who stole my husband, right? Where did my wife get? I forgot to pay this bill on time again. Well, see, that's why we can't trust you with the money, right? You do this all the time. I've been waiting for you to forget it again, so I'll be right again. How about instead you just try it? Okay, well, I know you've been busy. We might have to pay a late fee or something. It's not the end of the world. We'll get back on track. Margin. Sure, there's a gap, but instead of using this gap to create a wall, a barrier, I'm going to use it to create space for you to grow in my direction. Here's an opportunity for me to give you the benefit of the doubt, to move you closer to me and me to you by communicating that I trust you and I know you have a good heart. In fact, the more gaps there are, the more opportunities you have to say, but I love you anyway, and I'm not going to give up trust, and I'm not going to give up hope. I'm persevering, and I'm protecting the integrity of this relationship. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't have difficult conversations. It doesn't mean that you even don't have some disagreements and arguments. Sometimes those bring things to the surface that need to be talked about. It doesn't mean you don't confront the realities of the relationship and work on stuff that needs to be worked on. Sometimes you do have to create some healthy boundaries even for yourself. But what this does mean that, okay, that after those hard conversations, after everybody's had their say, even if we're still mad, even if there's still this gap, you still have a choice to make. And you can choose to believe the best or assume the worst. And relationships that last, relationships that make it through years like we've been through this last year, choose to believe the best. So let me just wrap up this entire series, put a little bow on it with two important truths. I want you to carry this along with you, along with hopefully all the other great pearls of wisdom you've got from this. But let me tell you something about your heart and your special someone's heart or any relationship that you care about, okay? Our hearts are always drawn towards acceptance. It's one of the deepest needs that each and every one of us have. I just want unconditional positive regard from you. I want you to accept me for me. God made us that way. And we've been talking a lot today, especially what we've been talking about is an opportunity to draw your heart and draw someone else's heart in your direction. But if there's not an atmosphere of acceptance, they might come home day after day after day. You might cohabitate for a few more years, but their heart doesn't come home with them. Their heart's not at home. If there's not an atmosphere of acceptance, I might be here in body, but I can't be here in mind and spirit completely. Strong, loving relationships, I've learned to create this atmosphere of acceptance by extending trust and choosing to consistently believe the best. And I get you can leave here today and completely disagree with me, and that's your right. This is just a bunch of relational psychobabble, Dennis, and I'm always giving them the benefit of the doubt, and if I do, I'm just going to be a doormat. I get it, right? I'll get burned. I'll never get what I want from this relationship. And I'm not saying there aren't risks. All relationships involve risk because they involve choices. Love is a risk. But I'd also just challenge you to play out the alternative. How's it working for you right now? Where's it taking you? And I know. You're right every time. You're right. But how's that working for you? Is it getting you what you want? What if instead, you tried what Jesus taught when he said to do to others what you would like them to do to you? What if you started treating him or her the way that you wanted them to treat you? For some of you, that alone could be revolutionary, and it's going to begin for some of you, maybe even before you leave this building today or later on the way home, or you'll face a choice later this week to have an opportunity to do this. Because here's the second thing I want to leave with you, and then we're going to pray and be dismissed. But this to me is why this is all so important. Sure, we want to experience happy, loving, healthy, long-term relationships. That's part of it. But we also, listen to me, we also have a generation coming up, many of whom have never even seen what happy, healthy relationships look like up close. They don't even know what they're aiming for when they become adults and get married, right? We had the opportunity to model for them a new kind of relationship that's based on some ancient principles that have stood the test of time. You've come from a divorced home, or you've had your own broken relationships. You've gone through hurt of your own. But now you have a chance to remodel and help those coming up behind you rethink those realities. Listen, our relationships are the greatest evangelistic tool that we have to a watching world. That's how Jesus said they'll know we're worth it, that we're one of his. It's how we love each other. Our relationships, that's why Jesus said, they speak louder than anything. And we who are followers of Jesus, more than anybody else, should be able to model this. Not because we're better than anybody, not because we're more outspoken and we're right. It's because we're not better. It's because we're sinners who mess up, who've been forgiven, who are learning to extend that forgiveness and grace to other people. Our greatest opportunity for impacting our culture, it isn't just going to church. It isn't just being religious, being right all the time. It's learning to lead with love. It's learning to follow the cues of our Savior and how he loved us. And it begins with understanding that God made love a verb when he sent his son Jesus to die for us and model what unconditional love really looks like. And it continues by understanding, we're all broken. We're all imperfect people in need of grace and acceptance from others. I get what I give, so we choose to extend that grace and acceptance to others. So I don't know what your next steps are today. Maybe you go out of here and you just kind of chew on this a little bit and wrestle with it, kick back against it. Just don't ignore it, okay? If you're new with us today, I would love for you to stop by the desk and lobby, let us know that you were here. We'd love to connect with you as well. But would you just pray with me? Father, I just pray that as we consider these truths, I thank you that, God, the way that you model love for us, it is so timeless. And God, that when we take the risk to take you at your word, to lead with love, the God, that we can see the real fruits of that. And I just thank you for allowing us to come and call you our Father. I just pray for those who are in relationships maybe that are growing and working. I thank you that your grace and mercy sustains that. We don't take credit because it's all for you. But God, I pray for those too that might be in relationships that may be just a little bit shaky. Maybe there's questions, just maybe real issues. I pray today would be a hopeful day. I just pray you give each of us here today and those that are watching, including me, just give us the wisdom to know what to do with what you've taught us. I pray that you would move us forward in our relationships and that it would not only be good for us, but it would be good for all of those in our circles of influence. Help us to model something different with this challenging but yet hopeful opportunity we have to do that. And we give it to you and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, glad you guys were here. Make sure